I still remember the exact moment my daughter-in-law looked me in the eye on Christmas morning and said, "This isn't really your house anymore, Mom. Things are different now." The room went quiet. My own son stood right beside her, staring at the floor like a guilty child. The smell of cinnamon candles and roasted turkey filled the air, but all I could taste was humiliation. I smiled. I actually smiled. And then I asked one simple question that changed everything. Was I wrong for what I did after that? Tell me honestly, would you have done the same in my place? Christmas has always been my holiday. I'm not saying that in a controlling way. I'm saying it because for 35 years, I was the one who built the magic. I was the one who stayed up past midnight wrapping gifts when money was tight. I was the one who baked cookies from scratch, even when my arthritis made it painful to knead the dough. I was the one who turned a tiny, drafty house into a warm home filled with laughter. My name is Margaret. I'm 62 years old, and for most of my life, my world revolved around my family, especially my son, Daniel. Daniel was my only child. I had him late in life, after years of trying, and one heartbreaking miscarriage I don't talk about much. His father left when Daniel was 7, just packed a suitcase one morning and said he needed space. Space turned into another woman and another life. So from that moment on, it was just me and my boy. I worked double shifts at a local diner for years. I missed sleep, I missed parties, I missed dating. I didn't miss a single one of Daniel's school plays, though. I didn't miss his soccer games. I didn't miss his tears when he was bullied in middle school. I was his safe place. When he grew up, went to college, and started his career in finance, I felt proud in a way that's hard to describe. I used to look at him and think, I did that. I raised a good man. He still called me every Sunday. He still came over for dinner twice a month. We had traditions. We had inside jokes. I thought nothing could ever come between us. And then he met her. Her name is Vanessa. She's 32 now, 5 years younger than Daniel. Beautiful, confident, sharp, tongued in a way that at first I mistook for intelligence. The first time Daniel brought her to dinner, she looked around my house and said, "Oh wow, this place is cozy." The pause before cozy told me everything. But I ignored it. I told myself I was being sensitive. She was young. Maybe that's just how young women talk now. I tried, I really did. I invited her to brunch. I asked about her job. She works in marketing, always talking about branding and image and presentation. She gave me skincare advice I didn't ask for. She once said, "You'd look 10 years younger if you changed your haircut." I laughed it off, but something about the way she said it wasn't kindness, it was assessment. Daniel proposed to her after just a year. I was surprised, but I smiled. At the engagement dinner, she made a speech about starting a new chapter and building our own traditions. Again, that word, our own. Like what we had before didn't count. Still, I paid for half the wedding. Actually, more than half. I used savings I had set aside for retirement because Daniel looked stressed about expenses, and Vanessa had very specific tastes. She wanted a winter wedding with crystal chandeliers, imported flowers, and a venue that cost more than my yearly salary back in my diner days. I told myself this is what mothers do. We sacrifice. After they got married, they moved into my house temporarily while their new condo was being renovated. That was supposed to last 3 months. It lasted 9. 9 months of slowly feeling like a guest in my own home. Vanessa reorganized my kitchen without asking. She replaced my curtains because they were dated. She told Daniel that my old couch made the living room look depressing. Packages started arriving daily, new decor, new plates, new throw pillows. I'd come home from grocery shopping and find my things moved, boxed, or sometimes just gone. When I asked about it, she'd smile sweetly and say, "Oh, I thought you wouldn't mind. It's better this way. Daniel changed too. Subtly at first, he'd say things like, "Mom, maybe you should let Vanessa handle the holiday planning this year. She has great ideas." Or, "Mom, don't take it personally. She just wants to modernize things." Modernize, as if I were an outdated appliance. First Christmas after they got married, Vanessa insisted on hosting, in my house. She said she wanted to create a vibe. I swallowed my pride and let her. She replaced my traditional red and gold decorations with white and silver. She took down the handmade ornaments Daniel made as a child and said they didn't match the aesthetic. I found them in a storage box in the garage. I cried that night, quietly, in my bedroom. I told myself it was just decorations. Just things, but it wasn't about the ornaments. It was about erasing history. This past Christmas, the one that changed everything, started like the others. I woke up early, out of habit, and made coffee. The house was already different. Vanessa had hired a caterer without telling me. She had rearranged the dining room table. She had even moved my late mother's china cabinet to open up the space. That cabinet has been in our family for 3 generations. When I gently mentioned it, she said, "Margaret, you have to let go of clutter. We're building a future here. We're building a future here. Not you, not this family. We." Later that morning, as guests started arriving, Vanessa's parents, her sister, some friends I barely knew, I realized something else. My side of the family hadn't been invited. My cousin Linda texted me asking what time she should come, and I had to awkwardly tell her there was a miscommunication. I confronted Daniel in the hallway. I asked him why my family wasn't included. He looked uncomfortable and said, "Vanessa thought it might be too crowded. Too crowded." In the house I bought, with the mortgage I paid off by working my fingers to the bone. That's when Christmas morning truly began to unravel. We were all gathered in the living room. Vanessa stood near the tree, handing out gifts like a queen distributing favors. She laughed loudly, posed for pictures, made sure every shot captured her perfect hosting. I sat quietly on the couch watching. At one point, she clinked her glass and said she wanted to make a little announcement. My heart sank. She thanked everyone for coming and then said, "This year feels especially special because Daniel and I are finally stepping into our own as a couple. We've made some changes around here, and it really feels like our home now. Our home." She looked at me then, directly at me, smiling. "And Margaret has been so generous letting us take the lead. Letting us take the lead." As if I were some elderly relative being kindly accommodated. I felt heat rise in my chest, not anger at first, something deeper. Betrayal. After everything I'd done, I was being gently pushed to the sidelines in my own life. Then came the moment. After gifts were opened and dinner was being served, Vanessa pulled me aside in the kitchen. Her tone was sweet but firm. She said, "I think going forward, it might be better if Daniel and I handle Christmas completely. Traditions evolve, and honestly, some of the old ways were a bit outdated. I hope you understand." Outdated? I looked at her. I looked at my son, who stood a few feet away, pretending to scroll through his phone. And that's when she said it. "This isn't really your house anymore, Mom. Things are different now. Not your house anymore." I smiled. I felt something click inside me, something calm, cold, clear, and I asked one question. But before I tell you what I asked her, before I tell you what I had already done weeks earlier, when I first sensed something was wrong, I want you to really think about this. If you spent your whole life building something, sacrificing for it, loving it, and then someone walked in and tried to rewrite the story like you were just a footnote, what would you do? Would you stay silent? Would you fight? Or would you smile like I did? Because that smile wasn't weakness. It was strategy, and what happened next changed everything. The moment she told me, "This isn't really your house anymore, Mom. Things are different now," something inside me didn't break. It hardened. I smiled at her. The same gentle smile I used to give Daniel when he was little and thought he'd gotten away with sneaking cookies before dinner. I looked at her perfectly styled hair, her manicured nails wrapped around a wine glass I had bought years ago. Standing on a kitchen floor, I had scrubbed on my hands and knees more times than I could count, and I asked her one simple question. "Oh, then whose name is on the deed?" She blinked. Just for a second. That perfect composure cracked so slightly most people wouldn't have noticed. But I did. Daniel shifted uncomfortably behind her. "Mom, that's not what she meant." I kept smiling. No, I'm genuinely asking. Because if it's not my house anymore, I must have missed something at the lawyer's office. Vanessa's lips tightened, but she recovered quickly. "We're family. It's not about paperwork." But it was about paperwork. It was always about paperwork. About ownership, about control. About subtle power plays disguised as modern thinking. The truth is, I had already seen this coming weeks before Christmas. I'm not stupid. I may be 62, but I'm not blind. I had overheard them late one night, voices hushed but urgent. Vanessa saying things like, "We need stability. We can't build our life here if it's always her house." Daniel responding, "She'd never just give it to us." And Vanessa whispering, "Then maybe she doesn't trust us." That word, trust, was deliberate. I knew it. After that night, I did something I had never done before. I protected myself. You see, the house isn't just a house. It's fully paid off. No mortgage. It sits on a corner lot that has doubled in value over the last decade. Daniel always assumed one day it would naturally become his. And maybe it would have, if things had stayed the way they were. But I started noticing small things. Vanessa asking casual questions about property taxes, about estate planning, about whether I had a will. She framed it as concern. "We just want to make sure everything's organized." So 3 weeks before Christmas, while they were out at some holiday party, I went to see my lawyer. Quietly, without telling anyone, I updated my will, not in anger, not impulsively, calmly. I set up a trust. The house would not automatically transfer to Daniel anymore. Instead, it would be placed in a charitable housing foundation that supports single mothers over 50 who are at risk of homelessness. Women like I once could have been, if life had twisted slightly differently. Daniel would still receive something. I'm not cruel. He would inherit a portion of my savings. But the house would serve women who needed safety more than he needed an upgraded lifestyle. And here's the part that makes people gasp when I tell them. I didn't do it to punish him. I did it because I suddenly realized I wasn't seen as a person anymore. I was seen as an asset, standing in that kitchen on Christmas after Vanessa told me it wasn't my house anymore. I already knew something she didn't. I already knew that the control she thought she was slowly gaining was an illusion. When I asked about the deed, she laughed lightly and said, "Margaret, no one's trying to take anything from you." But I looked at Daniel. "Are you?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. That silence told me more than words ever could. Dinner resumed awkwardly after that. The laughter felt forced. Vanessa tried to regain the festive mood, but I could sense a tension threading through the room. Her mother kept glancing between us. Daniel barely spoke. Later that evening, when most guests had left, Daniel knocked on my bedroom door. I was sitting on my bed, holding one of those handmade ornaments Vanessa had boxed away. It was a crooked little clay snowman Daniel, made in 2nd grade. I had rescued it from the garage earlier that day. "Mom," he said softly, stepping inside, "you embarrassed her." I looked up at him slowly. "I embarrassed her? You didn't have to bring up the deed like that. I placed the ornament on my nightstand. She didn't have to tell me it's not my house anymore." He sighed heavily, like I was the difficult one. "You're taking it too literally. She just meant we're building a life here." "And where exactly do I fit in that life, Daniel?" He hesitated. That hesitation cut deeper than anything Vanessa had said. I asked him if I wasn't here, if this house wasn't here, would you still visit as often? Would you still call every Sunday? He looked offended, of course, but his eyes betrayed uncertainty, and that's when I realized something terrifying. I had spent my whole life making sure Daniel never felt abandoned the way I did when his father left. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to make sure I wouldn't be the one left behind. Over the next few days after Christmas, the house felt colder. Vanessa avoided me. Daniel was distant. I could sense conversations happening behind closed doors. One afternoon, I overheard Vanessa say, "She's being dramatic. It's emotional manipulation." Emotional manipulation? I almost laughed, the irony. A week later, Vanessa approached me again, this time with a softer tone. She suggested maybe I should consider downsizing. "This house is too big for you," she said. "Daniel and I could handle it better long term." There it was. Finally, more honest. I asked her calmly, "Are you asking me to move out?" She smiled tightly. "Of course not. Just think about what makes sense for everyone." Everyone. That word again. And this is where I need to pause and ask you something. If you were in my shoes, hearing your daughter-in-law gently suggest that you're fully paid off, home would be better managed without you, knowing your own son isn't strongly defending you, what would you do? Would you confront them aggressively? Would you quietly comply? Or would you prepare for something bigger? Because I had already prepared, but I wasn't done yet. You see, I didn't want revenge, not the screaming, dramatic kind. I wanted clarity. I wanted to see exactly how far they were willing to go. So I told Vanessa I would think about downsizing. Her reaction was immediate, too immediate. Her eyes lit up in a way she tried to hide. She started casually mentioning real estate agents. She sent me listings for small condos perfect for seniors. Daniel began talking about renovation ideas for this house. My house, they weren't even pretending anymore. That's when I scheduled another meeting with my lawyer. This time I brought paperwork. I initiated the legal process to formally place the house into the trust immediately, not upon my death, but effective within the year. It would still be my residence for life, but ownership would no longer be transferable to family members. It would be locked. No one could pressure me later. When I signed those documents, my hands didn't shake. I felt peaceful, but I hadn't told them yet, and I knew the moment I did would change my relationship with my son forever. The question wasn't whether they wanted the house. That much was clear now. The question was whether they loved me beyond what I could provide. And I was about to find out. The day I decided to tell them wasn't dramatic. There was no storm outside, no shattered glass, no screaming match building in the background. It was an ordinary Sunday afternoon, the kind that used to mean pot roast in the oven and Daniel sitting at the kitchen counter telling me about his week. But this Sunday felt different. It felt like standing on the edge of something final. I had already signed the documents. The trust was active. The house was legally secured. No one could quietly shift it into their name. No one could handle it better long term. It was done, and yet my heart was heavier than I expected. Because this wasn't just about property. It was about my son. It was about whether the boy I raised still saw me as his mother, or just as an obstacle between him and a comfortable future. I called them both into the living room. Vanessa came in first, arms folded loosely but posture alert, like she sensed something important was coming. Daniel followed, cautious, glancing between us like a referee anticipating conflict. I sat in my usual armchair. The same one Vanessa once called dated. I folded my hands in my lap and smiled gently, not the sharp smile from Christmas, but a tired one. "I've thought about what you said." I began, looking at Vanessa, about downsizing, about what makes sense for everyone. Her face brightened instantly. Daniel leaned forward slightly. I could almost see them, imagining paint samples and renovation budgets. "And?" Daniel asked. His voice carried a thread of hope that hurt more than I thought it would. "And I agree," I said calmly. "It's important to think long term. Vanessa's smile widened. She reached for Daniel's hand. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds before continuing. So I've made arrangements. Daniel blinked. Arrangements. I nodded. I've placed the house into a charitable trust. It will support housing for single women over 50 who need stability. I will live here for the rest of my life, but after I'm gone, the house will not pass to family. It will serve women who don't have anyone. The room went completely still. Vanessa's hand slowly slipped out of Daniel's. Daniel stared at me like he hadn't understood the words. What do you mean it won't pass to family? He asked, his voice dropping. I held his gaze. I mean exactly what I said. It's legally binding. The papers are signed. Vanessa's composure cracked first. You did this without even discussing it with us, she demanded. I tilted my head slightly. Discussing my property. Her jaw tightened. We're your family, yes, I said softly, and I needed to see if I was yours. Daniel stood up abruptly. Mom, this is extreme. Extreme. That word echoed in my chest. Is it? I asked gently, because I remember being told this isn't really my house anymore. He winced. Vanessa looked away briefly. I continued, still calm. I've worked my entire life for this home. I sacrificed vacations, retirement funds, relationships. I did it happily because it meant security. Not just for you, Daniel, but for me too. And somewhere along the way, I started feeling like security for you meant displacement for me. That's not fair. Daniel shot back, but his voice lacked conviction. Vanessa stepped forward. This is punishment, she said sharply, because we wanted to build a future. I looked at her steadily. No, it's protection, because I realized I was slowly being edited out of my own life. Silence settled again. Heavy, uncomfortable, Daniel ran a hand through his hair. You could have talked to us. I smiled sadly. I tried. Every time I expressed discomfort, I was told I was being emotional, outdated, dramatic. Vanessa's face flushed. This is the moment where I need to ask you something, because I truly wrestled with it that night. Was I being vindictive? Was I letting pride drive a wedge between me and my only child? Or was I finally drawing a boundary after years of subtle erosion? If you were me, sitting there watching your son calculate the financial implications before the emotional ones, what would you feel? Anger, regret, or clarity? Pause and think about that, because this is where everything shifted. Daniel started pacing. Do you even realize what you've done? He asked. You've basically told us you don't trust us. I inhaled slowly. Trust isn't something you inherit, Daniel. It's something you maintain. Vanessa let out a short laugh. So that's it. You think we were just waiting for you to die. The bluntness of that sentence stunned even Daniel. I didn't raise my voice. I think, I said carefully, that somewhere along the way, this house became more important to you than I was. Daniel stopped pacing. He looked at me, and for a split second, I saw the little boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street. That's not true, he whispered. I held his gaze, then prove it. Vanessa stepped in quickly. This is manipulation, she insisted. You're forcing us to choose between agreeing with you and losing everything. I shook my head. No, I'm forcing you to choose between loving me as a person and loving what I can provide. Daniel looked torn in a way I had never seen before. It scared me, not because I thought he'd choose the house, but because I wasn't sure he wouldn't. The argument didn't explode the way I expected. It fizzled into strained silence. Vanessa retreated to their room. Daniel lingered. Why didn't you just tell us you felt pushed out? He asked quietly. I swallowed, because every time I tried, I was told I was imagining it. He didn't argue. That silence again, that awful, revealing silence. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house changed drastically. Vanessa barely spoke to me unless necessary. I overheard her on the phone telling someone. She just gave it away out of spite. Spite. as if I hadn't spent decades building the foundation they were standing on. Daniel became distant, withdrawn. He spent longer hours at work. When he was home, he avoided eye contact, and that hurt more than any confrontation could have. One evening, about a week later, Daniel knocked on my door again. This time he looked exhausted. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded. He sat across from me, elbows on his knees. "Vanessa feels blindsided," he said. "She thought you trusted us." I studied his face. "Daniel, answer me honestly. Before I signed those papers, had you two discussed transferring the house into your name?" He hesitated. "That was all the answer I needed. We were just talking hypothetically," he said weakly. I nodded slowly. "And hypothetically, when was I supposed to stop living here?" His eyes widened. "That's not what we meant." I leaned back. "Then what did you mean?" He struggled for words. "We just thought it made sense long term." I felt something inside me settle into certainty. Long-term planning doesn't require pushing someone out emotionally in the present. I said gently, "It doesn't require erasing their traditions, boxing up their memories, suggesting they downsize before they're ready." His shoulders slumped. Then he said something that pierced me deeper than anything else. "Vanessa feels like you never fully accepted her." I blinked. "I paid for half your wedding," I said softly. "I welcomed her into my home for 9 months. I tolerated being rearranged in my own kitchen." He looked conflicted. "She feels judged." I let out a small breath. I was judged first. That conversation ended without resolution. But something fundamental had cracked open. A few days later, Vanessa confronted me again, this time without Daniel present. "You've put us in an impossible position," she said coldly. "How?" I asked calmly. "Because now Daniel has to choose between siding with you or building a future with me." I looked at her steadily. "If building a future with you requires removing me from it, then maybe the problem isn't the paperwork." Her eyes flashed. "You think you're being noble. You're just afraid of losing control." I almost smiled at the irony. "Control? I gave up control the moment I let you rearrange my entire house. This isn't about control. It's about dignity." She didn't respond to that. She simply turned and walked away, and for the first time, I didn't feel small watching her leave. I felt anchored, grounded, because I had finally drawn a line. But here's the twist I didn't expect. About 2 weeks after that confrontation, Daniel came home early one evening. Alone, Vanessa wasn't with him. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table and looked like he had aged 5 years. "She wants us to move out," he said quietly. My heart skipped. "Because of this?" I asked. He nodded. "She says she can't live in a house that's not going to be ours." That sentence hit me like a wave. Not ours, not a house filled with tension, not a house where relationships feel strained, just not ours. "And what do you want?" I asked him gently. He looked at me for a long time before answering. "I don't know anymore." And that uncertainty told me everything. The house had become a symbol, not just of wealth or inheritance, but of where loyalty truly lay. And the choice Daniel had to make was bigger than property. It was about whether marriage meant erasing his past to prove devotion to his future. As I sit here telling you this, I still replay that moment in my head. Was I testing him unfairly? Was I forcing clarity too soon? Or was this confrontation inevitable the moment I realized love had conditions attached? Tell me honestly, if you were my son, caught between a wife who wants stability and a mother who wants respect, what would you do? Because what happened next, I never saw coming. When Daniel told me Vanessa wanted to move out because she couldn't live in a house that's not going to be ours, I felt something inside me go very still, not angry, not even surprised, just still, because that sentence confirmed what I had been sensing for months. This was never about space. It was never about modernization or building traditions. It was about ownership, about security, that depended on my eventual absence. And hearing my son repeat those words out loud made the truth impossible to ignore. I didn't argue with him that night. I didn't try to convince him to stay. I simply asked very calmly, "And what do you want, Daniel?" He looked exhausted, torn in half by something he didn't know how to name. "I want peace," he said quietly. I nodded. "Peace built on what?" He didn't answer, because peace built on silence isn't peace. It's surrender. Over the next week, the house felt like a waiting room before surgery. Conversations were brief. Footsteps were careful. Vanessa began browsing apartments openly at the kitchen table. She didn't even try to hide it. I would walk in and see listings on her laptop. Modern condos with floor-to-ceiling windows, neutral color palettes, everything minimalist and controlled. Everything curated. One evening, I overheard her telling her sister on the phone, "Once we're out of here, we can finally start our life properly. Finally start our life." As if the last 9 months had been some inconvenient layover, Daniel started packing slowly, not aggressively, not angrily, just methodically. That almost hurt more. Watching him wrap dishes I had bought when he was a teenager. Watching him pack books from the shelf we assembled together years ago. Every box felt like a quiet goodbye. And here's where everything reached the breaking point. 3 days before they were set to move into a temporary rental, Vanessa decided to have one final conversation with me. She came into the living room while Daniel was at work. She stood across from me, arms crossed, chin lifted slightly. "I hope you're happy," she said. I looked up from the book in my lap. "About what?" I asked gently. "About pushing us out." I closed the book carefully. "You chose to leave." She laughed, sharp and humorless. "You made it impossible to stay." I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my voice steady. "No, Vanessa. I made it impossible to quietly assume something that was never yours." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't trust me." I held her gaze. Trust is built on actions. Rearranging someone's home without asking, excluding their family from Christmas, suggesting they downsize before they're ready. Those aren't actions that build trust. She stepped closer. "You were always testing me," she accused. I almost smiled sadly. "No, I was hoping you'd treat me like a person instead of an obstacle." For a moment something flickered in her expression. Doubt, guilt, it vanished quickly. "Daniel deserves stability," she said. "And so did I." I replied softly. That silenced her. But the real climax didn't happen in that living room. It happened the night before they moved out. Daniel knocked on my bedroom door again, just like he had so many times before when he was a boy afraid of thunderstorms. But this time, the storm was inside him. He sat down at the edge of my bed and stared at the floor. "Mom," he said quietly, "did you ever plan on giving me the house?" The honesty of that question made my throat tighten. I answered truthfully, "Yes, before." He looked up sharply. "Before what?" I swallowed, before I felt like I was being slowly removed from it. He exhaled heavily. "Vanessa thinks you changed because you don't like her." I shook my head gently. "I changed because I started feeling unwanted in my own space." He rubbed his face with both hands. "She says a wife should come first." I nodded slowly. A wife should come first in a marriage, but that doesn't mean a mother should come last in life. He didn't argue. He just sat there, absorbing it. And then he said something I will never forget. "If I stay with her, I lose you. If I choose you, I lose her." I felt tears threaten to rise, but I held them back. "No," I said firmly. "You only lose me if you believe loving me requires owning what's mine." He stared at me, confused. So I continued. "This was never about choosing between us. It was about whether you could love me without conditions attached." That was the moment the truth fully landed on him. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Vanessa was finishing packing when Daniel told her he needed to talk. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was in the kitchen, but their voices carried down the hallway. He told her he didn't feel right leaving under these circumstances. He told her he felt like the house had become more important than the relationship. He told her he needed to know if she would still want the same future if there was nothing to inherit. The silence that followed felt endless. Then I heard her say, "So you're choosing her?" And his response shook me. He said, "No, I'm choosing not to treat my mother like a stepping stone." There it was, the line drawn. Not by me this time, by him. Vanessa's reaction was explosive. She accused him of being manipulated. She said I had orchestrated everything. She said any man who prioritized his mother over his wife would never grow. But Daniel didn't yell back. He didn't defend aggressively. He simply repeated, "I won't build a future on resentment." She left that afternoon. Not just the house, the marriage. She went to stay with her parents, and within 2 months she filed for separation. Now here's where I need to ask you again, was this the outcome I wanted? Did I secretly hope he would see through everything and choose me? Or did I simply want him to see clearly? Because the truth is complicated. I never wanted my son's marriage to end. I wanted it to be healthy. I wanted him to have a partner who saw family as expansion, not replacement. The aftermath wasn't easy. Daniel went through weeks of guilt and doubt. He questioned whether he had overreacted, whether he had failed as a husband. There were nights I heard him pacing in his room, nights I almost knocked on his door but stopped myself. He needed to process it without me steering him. Friends and extended family eventually found out about the trust. Some called me strong, others called me dramatic. A few whispered that I had interfered too much, but none of them had stood in my kitchen on Christmas morning and heard their existence minimized. About 3 months after Vanessa left, Daniel sat down with me at the same kitchen table where so many arguments had unfolded. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "if she had been okay staying even without the house, maybe things would have been different." I nodded. "Maybe." He looked at me carefully. "You really weren't punishing us, were you?" I shook my head no. I was protecting myself. He absorbed that slowly. And then something happened that healed more than I expected. He said, "I'm sorry." Just that. No defensiveness. No justification. Just sorry for not seeing sooner, for not standing up sooner, for letting conversations happen that should have been shut down. I didn't gloat. I didn't say I told you so. I just reached across the table and held his hand, because at the end of the day, he's still my son. And love doesn't disappear just because clarity arrives late. The house feels different now, quieter. But not tense. The decorations are back the way I like them. The handmade ornaments are back on the tree. The china cabinet is back in its corner. And more importantly, I don't feel like a guest in my own life anymore. Vanessa and Daniel finalized their divorce 6 months later. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victorious. I felt reflective, because this wasn't about winning. It was about boundaries. And sometimes boundaries cost you something. The divorce papers were signed on a quiet Tuesday morning. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no shouting, no slammed doors. Just signatures on paper and 2 people who once promised forever, walking away with silence between them. Daniel came home that afternoon looking hollow, like someone had scooped something out of his chest and left only the outline behind. I was in the kitchen when he walked in, and for a moment we just looked at each other. I didn't rush to hug him. I didn't say I told you so. I simply asked, "Are you okay?" And he gave the most honest answer I think I've ever heard from him. He said, "I don't know who I am right now." That sentence stayed with me for weeks, because here's the part no one talks about when a marriage ends over something like this. It's not just about love fading, it's about identity. Daniel had built a version of himself around being a husband, around building that future Vanessa kept talking about. And when that future collapsed, he was left questioning every decision he had made, including the ones that involved me. The first few weeks after she moved out were heavy. The house felt like it was holding its breath. There were empty spaces where her decorative pieces used to sit. There were faint marks on the walls where she had hung framed quotes about ambition and growth. I didn't repaint them immediately. I let the walls sit with their scars for a while, because pretending nothing happened would have been dishonest. Daniel spent a lot of time alone. I heard him on the phone occasionally, speaking to friends, sometimes to a therapist he had started seeing. That was his choice, and I respected it deeply. I didn't want to become the emotional replacement for his marriage. That would have been another unhealthy dynamic. Instead, I made sure dinner was there if he wanted it. I made sure the house felt warm, but not suffocating. And one evening, about a month after everything was finalized, he sat down across from me again and said something that changed the tone of everything moving forward. He said, "I think I was scared." I looked at him carefully. Of what? Of losing her, he admitted. Of not being enough, of not being the kind of husband who provides stability. He swallowed hard, and somewhere in that fear, I stopped paying attention to how you were feeling. That was the moment I realized this story was never just about Vanessa. It was about insecurity, about societal expectations, about the pressure men feel to prove they can provide something tangible, like property, like assets, as evidence of adulthood. I didn't respond with anger. I responded with truth. I told him providing doesn't mean taking. Stability doesn't require displacing someone else's security. He nodded slowly. I see that now. And for the first time since Christmas morning, I felt something close to peace settle in my chest. But I need to be completely honest with you here. There were nights I questioned myself, nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling wondering if I had overcorrected. If maybe, just maybe, I could have handled things more gently. Maybe I could have sat them both down earlier and expressed my fears without waiting for the tension to build. Maybe I could have trusted that love would override ambition. So tell me something. If you were me, would you have done anything differently? Would you have kept quiet and hoped it resolved itself? Would you have transferred partial ownership to ease their anxiety? Or would you have drawn the same line I did, because I still replay it sometimes, not with regret, but with reflection? About 6 months after the divorce, something unexpected happened. Daniel came to me with a proposal. Not about property, not about inheritance, but about partnership. He said he had been volunteering at a community housing center through work, and it reminded him of the trust I had set up. He asked if I would be open to visiting one of the facilities the foundation supported. At first, I was surprised. Then I was deeply moved. We went together on a Saturday afternoon. The building wasn't fancy. It wasn't modern glass and steel like the condos Vanessa loved. It was modest, clean, safe, and filled with women around my age who had stories etched into their faces. Women who had left difficult marriages. Women whose children lived in other states. Women who had lost everything to medical bills or betrayal or simple bad luck. One woman in particular, named Teresa, told us she had been sleeping in her car before finding this place. She said, "I didn't need luxury. I just needed dignity." That word hit me like a bell ringing in my chest. Dignity? On the drive home, Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I think I understand now." I didn't ask what he meant. I let him continue. It wasn't about keeping the house from me. It was about keeping yourself from disappearing. Yes, that was exactly it. Somewhere along the way, I had felt myself shrinking to accommodate someone else's vision of the future, and I refused to vanish politely. Life now feels balanced, not perfect, but balanced. Daniel moved into a small apartment downtown. His choice. He said he needed space to rebuild who he was independently. We still have Sunday dinners, but now they feel intentional instead of routine. He helps me hang the Christmas decorations again. The handmade ornaments are back on the tree, right where they belong. And this past Christmas, when we stood in the living room together, he said something softly that almost made me cry. He said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." And I realized something important. Standing up for yourself doesn't mean giving up on someone else. Vanessa reached out once, months later. A brief message wishing me well. No apology, no anger, just distance. I didn't respond, not out of bitterness, but because some chapters don't need epilogues. The trust remains in place. The paperwork is locked, secure, unchangeable. And I don't regret that, not for a second, because the house no longer feels like leverage. It feels like purpose. One day, when I'm gone, it will shelter women who need a second chance at stability. And that thought brings me more comfort than the idea of it being renovated into something unrecognizable. If there's a lesson in all of this, and I've had plenty of time to think about it, it's this: love without boundaries becomes sacrifice, and sacrifice without respect becomes resentment. I loved my son fiercely. I still do. But loving him doesn't require erasing myself. So when I smiled on Christmas morning and asked that one question about whose name was on the deed, it wasn't sarcasm. It was awakening. It was the moment I stopped being quietly edited out of my own story. Was it messy? Yes. Did it cost something? Absolutely. But sometimes the cost of silence is far greater. If you were on my side, if you believe that protecting your dignity is not cruelty but strength, then like this video. If you think I went too far, I genuinely want to hear why. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section, because conversations like this matter more than we admit. And if you want more real, raw stories like this, stories about boundaries, family, betrayal, and growth, make sure you subscribe. There's always another chapter waiting to be told. I'll see you all in the next story.